This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi, I hope your week is going well. The clocks have changed here in the UK, so it's an interesting time if you like being outdoors like I do. Perhaps though, to help you feel better about yourself, what you could do is find an indoor sport to get your teeth into. And this is one part of the conversation today, where we talk about gymnastics and perfectionism. Though I've got to say, arguably, that the content actually does overlap to other sports and other settings. Yeah, my friend and colleague, Dr. Alessia Bruno, joined me. Alessia also appeared on episode 12 of the podcast, which is a really popular one. She provides some fantastic insights into the good and healthy side of perfectionism, as well as the downsides. We share some snippets of advice for gymnasts, for coaches, and for parents, where we discuss sport performance and its connection with self-worth. Social approval is also touched on, as is self-criticism, being hard on yourself, and how to deal with it better. I hope that you go on to enjoy the episode as much as I did recording it. Hi, Alessia. It's lovely to have you back on the podcast today.
Hi, David. It's really lovely to see you again. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, no worries. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. We're going to talk about gymnastics, aren't we? And perfectionism, which seems to be quite a big thing in gymnastics and obviously something we come across on a regular basis. Do you want to start with just discussing perfectionism and some of the good sides around it?
Yeah, actually, perfectionism, first of all, is a personality disposition, right? So some people, it's a characteristic that some people have, while others people do not have. And this is always in relation to performance, which can be, as you said, in gymnastics, so in sport, as well as in school, academic, in your job, creative performance. And although in the past tended to have a negative connotation, the term of perfectionism and was related to kind of stress and maybe later on mental health problem or burnout because of the characteristic of rigidity and control. Nowadays, experts, and this is what you were talking about, more the positive side of perfectionism, are talking about perfectionistic striving as a type of perfectionism and as a type of healthy perfectionism. Because people who are perfectionistic striving, they really have high standard, right? But they don't have the characteristic of being overly concerned about making mistake. They don't have the tendency to be scared of other people's judgment or negative evaluation. And the perfectionistic striving aspect is positively correlated to the processes. This is what research has found. And for processes, we mean, the hope that you have that you might succeed, the ability for goal setting and overall well-being, self-serving attribution, but also for outcomes. And the outcomes, we don't mean just results, but we mean the ability to adjust, to psychologically adjust to stress, to manage stress, to live well with other people, and to have an overall well-being. So if we look at perfectionism with the positive connotation, a healthy perfectionist as a person who has the tendency to be perfect, to have the aspects of perfectionistic striving. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, it certainly does. Well, when I think back to the 4 C's framework with mental toughness, with obviously the podcast's called Demystifying Mental Toughness, you've got the element of goal orientation there, which essentially is someone who's going to set goals and then got achievement orientation into it, where they're not necessarily going to be distracted so much from actually achieving their goals. So I can see where that fits nicely. And then we have
it's very like focused, and also like if has a very positive self-view. So like self-serving attribution, we mean that if you succeed, you perceive it as down to your ability, your skills, your commitment. So and you don't tend to be so affected by the judgment of others. So you're really focused. You're like in the zone. You're confident. So you're really oriented, as you say, to your goals.
So yeah, so in terms of the goal setting there, if we flip it, so where do you think the perfectionists can go a little bit wrong with their goal setting?
Well, it can go wrong with the goal setting when actually it's a type of perfectionist which has the traits of perfectionistic concern. So let's say if somebody wants to get things always right, and the self-value is really affected by getting things right, but it's also affected by the judgment of others. As a person who's a warrior, he's perfectionistic, but he's worried about outcomes, and value gives oneself value according to what achieves all the time. It's going to put a lot of pressures and stress on the person, and this results in some avoidant behavior, which means that you don't, your ability to goal setting and planning is going to be affected, because when your anxiety level increases, every time you have to deal with objectives and goals, you tend to avoid it, right? So this is when the goal setting becomes affected by the tendency of being perfectionistic concern rather than striving.
And I would imagine with gymnastics, obviously gymnasts are judged, aren't they, by their performances, by numbers.
Yeah.
From what you're saying there, I would imagine there can be an overlap with a lot of gymnasts where if their numbers aren't great, their performances aren't great, then it's going to impact on their self-worth and their self-esteem.
Yeah, I have a client actually. I'm thinking about somebody I have, and she was referred by her parents. She's a minor, so she was referred by her parents, and she was high in perfectionistic striving, but also in concern. And when the two aspects are together, it's not healthy, can affect self-confidence, performance, motivation. Because, for instance, because their level of concern and worry about failing was really high, on the top of really struggling to set manageable goals, she had all these anxiety symptoms like palpitations, stomach pain, and especially sweaty hands. And for a gymnastic, having sweaty hands is an issue, because you have to grab a ball, grab a ribbon, a ball, a hoop. How are you gonna do that? And she was like applying all this mannerism, these unhelpful coping strategies, like rubbing her hands, against their outfits, and obviously before a competition you cannot do that. It doesn't look good, and their coach was getting was being unhappy about this behavior. And so what she ended up trying to make up for this feeling of inadequacy and anxiety, she was like overtraining. This is something the coach didn't ask her to do, but she was overtraining to compensate this fear of failing. And she thought that by overtraining, she would have got things perfect. But actually, by overtraining, she was getting exhausted, really running the risk to burnout. And she was training for hours that the coach didn't ask her to do, actually. And the parents were really worried, because they were seeing that this was affecting their social life, as well as the academic grades. They were getting lower, and their mood was being affected. So this situation in gymnastics can happen as well. And in this case, we did like a really good teamwork with the parents as well as the coach. And this is really what you need to do, to work with the system to help the athletes, no matter if it's a minor or an adult. Working together it really leads to helpful outcome, to positive outcomes. So at times I see that when when they have the tendency to be worried about the outcome, the results, and they feel they're not good enough, their perfectionistic traits make them feel they're not good enough, and they are rigid and controlling, they tend to burn out, because they become so obsessed, and they will push themselves to the limit that this is really unhealthy, for them.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've noticed is obviously in gymnastics that once you get to the more elite level, you're training 20, 25 hours per week. And on top of that, they're generally at school or in some sort of education. So that's going to be 30 plus hours.
And many of them go to a physiotherapist as well. Some of them get injured. So there are lots of hours of work around gymnastic. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And they've got homework on top of that. So essentially they're performing around about 60 plus hours per week. And as you say there, you've talked about overtraining. I can see how that links with perfectionism. So there's probably a key message there for coaches and for parents there to think about the need for downtime and just to actually chill out and relax.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, having said that, about my kid, that gymnastic that I was seeing, the coach who wanted her to train less, and we made it really overt. You don't have to train all these hours, you're gonna burn out. But she was feeling so insecure that she pushed herself to the limit until myself, the coach, and their parents really gave stop, because this was really affecting her overall mental health as well as her competition. So in what way coach can help? Maybe this, certainly liaise, being a teamwork. So always exchanging information with sport psychologists or getting the parents on board as well when it's a minor can be really helpful. Coaches can help the athletes to provide the right number of training hours. They can also, when, for instance, the athlete has injuries or has all these negative cognitions, leaving some space for, I call it humanness, in a way, learning from setbacks, learning from injuries, because most of the time we know these amazing stories about top athletes, only about their successes and good outcomes. We don't know about the downside and a negative experience they have. But actually, I believe that if coaches will talk more, will normalize more, injuries and setbacks actually can be very inspirational for young athletes. They can also watch videos together, tell stories, but also teaching. We can help coach to coach in a way by teaching coaches some techniques, psychological techniques like breathing or visualization that can help, that they can use to help the athletes before a competition.
I suppose as well in that you touched on a good one there when you're talking about setbacks and failure. Really, the job of the coach is to be very, very careful with their language when the gymnast is going through those difficulties, and really helping them recognize that it's a normal part of sport and life for that matter, and also be aware where they might be getting pulled into feeling stressed themselves, and then it's showing with the way they communicate to the athlete. And I suppose one thing I noticed with some coaches too is that the coach can take on the athlete's problem, can't they? And let that then affect their own self-worth and self-esteem, which then impacts the communication. So it's all about self-awareness. It's complicated.
I've noticed that too, actually, with coaches, especially who have young athletes. They tend to stop being just coaches and they become sort of parents, and that is when this line doesn't have to be crossed, because then they risk the burnout, because they overload themselves with some responsibilities that don't really belong to them. So coaches have to be coaches, in the field during competition. They have to be good guys, but in relation to the athletic, let's say. And then for the rest, we have the parents, but also like coaches, I'm thinking was about like positive psychology. They could be helpful in looking at what you can learn from it. Okay, you make a mistake, but what can you learn from it? What can you do different next time? And reconnect also to the joyful part of sport.
Yeah.
Especially when they're young, but also when they're like, when I see like adults who are athletes, most of the time when it becomes a job, I have some athletes who say, okay, today I should train, I don't really feel like, so they need as well to reconnect to that fun part. There is a reason why you chose the sport. So you got like great feeling out of it, so you have to reconnect with that too.
Yeah, I think you've hit something quite big there as well, because obviously the perfectionist can get drawn into that striving angle, and why they chose to take the sport on initially, and that playful part to it just gets dismissed to one side. So yeah, definitely.
And that reminds me of sorry, David, I was thinking like a turning point with this gymnastic was when I connected to the passion and the fun part of sport. That was a turning point. So it wasn't only about, it wasn't about getting it right all the time and succeed all the time. But I remember on the top of doing like brain spotting or reprocessing, like failure experiences that were still in the present, so that we move the past into the past by processing stuff. I really wanted her to connect to the fun part, but also to the human part, to love herself, no matter if she succeeded or not. And also to remember how much she enjoyed the sport. And before every competition, I used to tell her, have fun. And she was like, what? Like fun? So yeah, because this is the fuel, is what keeps you going. Not so much the achievement, because when you achieve like a medal, for instance, then soon after you're happy about having gained this medal, you start thinking, especially the perfectionistic person starts thinking, okay, I now have to keep, next competition, people expect me to get a medal. So the pressures come back and you stop having fun. That's why to connect with fun is so important. This is the real fuel that keeps your motivation, your passion going. Does it make sense?
Yeah, completely. It does. Yeah. I'm right. Which way do I take this now? There's so many different ways. No, I love that part. I know I read a book a while back. I think it was called Play. I'll make sure I put it in the show notes. It's a really valuable book, which really helps you connect with your playful side and understand your play personality. I think most definitely a perfectionist could really use reading that book. I'm keen though to move on. You also talked about in social approval, really, where there's an overlap really with perfectionism here, where some perfectionists can worry an awful lot about what the coach thinks, what the parent thinks, what their peers think. So how do you help as a sports psychologist? The gymnast who struggles with that.
Yeah, first of all, I think that the way you see yourself comes a lot also from the message that has been passed into you from your parents. In a way, I tend to see that people who have like good confidence, her confidence, have a good self-esteem, they were brought up believing that they're worthwhile, no matter what they achieve. They are a worthwhile person. But like people who were brought up with a lot of pressure, rigidity, control, and critical parenting, they are the people who tend to be more vulnerable to other people's judgment and view. It's true that like bullying and other negative experiences can happen outside the family, but if you were brought up believing that you are a valuable person, I see that when you go into the external world, your confidence is stronger. You have this protective factor, let's say, you're less subjected to be bullied or to be vulnerable to other people's judgment. But can I just say something about the parenting?
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, what I've noticed from my experience is that when you have a perfectionistic parent, mother, father, both of them, and they put a lot of pressure and control and rigidity on the child really struggles later on and has a tendency to want to be perfect. But at times, you have perfectionistic traits in parents who don't want to be perfectionistic with the children, but as a role model, they unwillingly, they don't mean to, but they pass the message that in order to be loved, popular, successful in life, you have to be like them. So unwillingly, they pass the message that perfectionism is important. And this is what usually happens. They don't mean to, but the children get it. And what is really important in terms of the support we can have from parents as sport psychologists or clinical psychologists, really to have them on board in passing the value that no matter what the child achieves, as long as the child gives the best, that is good enough,
Yeah.
And they are valued and important no matter how much successful they are. It's really about the person, not the performance in a way. And they need time to process, to learn, to have fun in life. So like children should be children, they have the right to be lighthearted as well.
So right, I think there's three things I picked out of that one. I'm probably going to forget one of them.
2 out of 3 is good enough.
Well, I'll get the first one in before I forget it. Right. So yeah, you mentioned there really about the child being a person, not a gymnast. So really the parent role there is to recognize that, isn't it? And try and provide the love as opposed to maybe the criticism or the critiquing, assessing performance there. Or I think there's a time and a place and a process to go about that, isn't there? I think that's 2 points. The third point would be the bit about, which links back to social approval, is as a parent is trying not to, and as a coach really, not to get into oh, look what Jenny did or what Sarah did and how well they did. Really,
this can happen in sport as well as at school. They tend to do it at school as well.
Yeah, it's so difficult. But yeah, just trying not to get into that comparison mode.
The comparison.
So I was going to say, as a coach, that must be really difficult. If you've got a group of, 6 or 7 gymnasts, and one of them excels in a certain skill, and you're trying to get another one to that level, it must be very easy to use that successful gymnast and put them on a pedestal. But actually, to some gymnasts, that's going to be really unhelpful, isn't it?
Yeah, and they might have different skills. So it would be really good in terms of what you were saying about mental toughness and positive psychology to look at what each single person has as resources and skills. So emphasizing that as well, rather than showing you what you don't have, And then if you really need to do that, is how you do it.
Yeah.
So it's different to say, oh, look, such and such Jane, mentioning the name, look Jane, she does this better than you and she achieved that and she's doing that, and saying, you know what, I really believe you can do that. You have the skills to do that. How about we work together to achieve that? It's a different type of communication. One is very critical and judgmental and makes you feel inferior and inadequate. And the other one is optimistic and hopeful. And I really have faith in your ability to achieve something. And this is something that coach can do, but also parents. And when you are saying about parents, it's important, that they provide the right value of sport. And I remember some of the parents I saw, they were parents who had unfulfilled dreams, and they were hoping their children achieve what they weren't able to achieve. And their relationship was based only on sport. Like if we talk about gymnastics and your competition, it's fine. Otherwise, I'm not interested in you. And there are some parents, unfortunately, who are like that. So the child who's not willing to do, for instance, to pursue this career, is really afraid of not only disappointing the parents, but to lose their relationship with the parents. And so there is a lot on stake. That's why we really have to get parents on board and do some psychoeducation on them as well when, they have this approach with the children.
So those conversations in the car on the way back home are also important.
So way back home, you can talk about other stuff as well, just change the topic. The coach will talk about that. They can talk if they want a bit about it, or just see what the child wants to talk about, making it like more child-centered rather than parent-centered.
Yeah, and often the child actually just wants a bit of peace and quiet, don't they? And just on their phone or whatever it is, just to switch off. The phone's not that bad at times.
Because then at high levels, it becomes a job, isn't it? Like on the top of the academic job, they have this extra job, which is training. So they might really want to switch off and have some fun and lighthearted time, do something different.
Most definitely. One last thing before we wrap things up. You've talked about self-criticism and like that inner critic a few times there. I would imagine a real skill for any gymnast who's a perfectionist is trying to be more self-compassionate, and actually teaching them that would be really, really helpful.
Yes, it's so important. It's so important, and actually I want to make sure this is a concept that like self-compassion is something that Paul Gilbert talks a lot, but also like comes from the East, let's say from the Buddhism like a perspective. But self-compassion doesn't mean self-pity. It's really is a different concept. It's about deserving to be happy, and have the right to succeed, but embracing humanness. So understanding that as a human being, you cannot be perfect all the time, and when you fail, is like looking at this as an opportunity, because you have the right to succeed. It's not seeing it as a label, that you failed this time, you will fail forever. And it's about developing love for yourself, no matter the outcomes you have. You are a good person, a worthwhile person. People will love you anyway, no matter what you achieve. And this is something I did with that gymnastic I was talking to you about, because she was so driven by the idea that unless she achieves something, people love me or don't love me. But actually, some of the visualization we did, it wasn't even about succeeding or like a gold medal or something that she won. It was really about some loving eyes that your dad had towards her. And I asked her before the competition to connect with that. And when she was connected to the loving eyes and the face expression of love and care that her dad had towards her, she was like really feeling in the body, was getting calm and relaxed, and she could perform better.
That reminds me actually of someone I worked with, where we got into talking about the like kind, gentle approach and what you would say to yourself. And we talked about an animal and what animal represented, like soft, gentle, and it was a polar bear. And she got into the habit of taking a polar bear with her in the car, like a cuddly toy, and trying to picture it. And it was so helpful. And she's gone on and done really well. There's so many different techniques, isn't there, around that? But certainly I would recommend to anybody listening to this to just have a good look at self-compassion. So it's
interesting how most of a mainstream psychology would think that you have to be tough and keep pushing and pushing and pushing to achieve goals, when actually you realize that when you just allow yourself to be human and you connect to real, the profound value of life, and love, you can actually perform better in a way and enjoy your sport even more.
Yeah, I suppose it'll free you up, won't it? You in effect, you're showing your vulnerable side. The fact that you are human, you're not perfect, pardon the pun. And then, as you say, I think physically and emotionally, you obviously just you relax a little bit more and free yourself up. So I've loved this conversation as usual, Alessia.
I loved it too, David.
Are you able to give three takeaways for the listeners based on what we've talked about?
Yeah, I think, first of all, be gentle to yourself. You're human. You're allowed to fail, and you have the right to succeed, right? And then I would say for coaches, your role is so important, but remember to be coaches, because this will prevent you from, getting burnout and being overly involved. And also make sure you look at the strength and communicate what needs to be improved in a constructive way, so not to affect the self-esteem. And third, parents, be parents, and remember the value of your children, no matter what they achieve, and make sure you have the space for the relationship with your children outside sport, because they will really value it.
Three fantastic takeaways. No, thank you. Whereabouts can the listeners find you? Should they want to reach out to you?
They can find me at www.performanceexpansion.com. I see people here in Italy in person, or I tend to see people abroad remotely on Zoom. So they can find me on the web.
Brilliant. Those details will go in the show notes. And again, a big thank you for your time and your insights there.
Thank you to you, David. I really enjoyed it as usual.
Well, that was another fascinating and insightful discussion. Alessia, as always, was great value. And one thing I'd like you to consider from today's podcast episode is the self-criticism angle around perfectionism. If you're a coach, can you go on to feed more self-criticism in your gymnasts or in your athletes by the way that you communicate, perhaps dishing out threats to them? And, can stress play a part in your life in this regard? Parents, again, can you become too judgmental and in essence teach your children to judge themselves very, very harshly? It's a really tough skill to master. And as a parent, I know I fall into that trap and then later kick myself. So for more on self-compassion and being kinder to yourself and kinder to others, feel free to listen to episodes 129, 130 and 131, where I discuss this in more depth. It certainly feeds into perfectionism and is a skill that we can all benefit from. Lastly, I'd like to mention that the weekly emails, conversations with kids, it's proving very, very popular and is something I'm getting a lot of good feedback on. Feel free to join this list by looking at the freebies section of our website, the 3ws.sport-excellence.co.uk, and the drop-down conversations with kids. Go on, get yourself signed up. It's a great way to informally and creatively help your children improve their mental strength and their emotional flexibility. Enjoy your week. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.